Good evening. It's a fortnight since Lord Freud made his remarks that some people with disability are not worth the full wage at a Conservative Party conference fringe meeting. So, in the 2 weeks that have elapsed before Ed Miliband revealed Lord Freud's words at the Prime Minister's question time today, Lord Freud presumably still held these views. Only when the Prime Minister accepted his minister's full and reserved apology this afternoon was it evident he had now disavowed his hitherto held belief. So our chief political correspondent, Laura Koensberg, is here to unravel what was the context of all this.
Well, Kirsty, it happened during the sweaty crush of the conference season, and the context is important. Lord Freud, who's a Conservative welfare minister, previously a Labour advisor, it's worth knowing, was asked by a councillor present at a public meeting, might there be a way, if there were some disabled people who wanted to work, that an employer could pay them less than the minimum wage in order to tempt the employer to do it, to take them on. Now, it was a public meeting. He didn't know he was being recorded, however. There was some form of mole at the meeting. But this is the recording, which today, 2 weeks later, was circulated earlier by Labour.
There is a group, and I know exactly, they're actually, as you say, they're not worth the full wage. And I'm going to go and think about that particularly. There is something we can do nationally and without distorting anything, which actually, if someone wants to work at £2 an hour, it can be actually.
There is, of course, the phrase that jumps out there. There is a small group where actually they are not worth the full wage. Those are his words. At best, if you like, it was a very clumsy exploration of a debate that might be worth having. But politically, of course, it was perfect fodder for Ed Miliband today at Prime Minister's questions. And what's interesting about this very fiery exchange is you can see, actually, straight off the bat, just how angry David Cameron was.
But it's very serious. He didn't just say that disabled people weren't worth the minimum wage. He went further and he said, and I quote, he was looking at, and I quote, whether there's something we can do if someone wants to work for £2 an hour. Mr. Speaker, surely someone holding those views can't possibly stay in his government.
Well, those are not the views of the government. They're not the views of anyone in the government. The minimum wage is paid to everybody, disabled people included.
Order!
So, what's the position tonight?
Well, Lord Freud, after Number 10 had a bit of trouble getting hold of him, did say sorry. He acknowledged, in his view, what he said was offensive. He was foolish to say it, and ministerial colleagues made no bones about saying that it was wrong. They didn't try to say, really, or he was taken out of context. I think Number 10 tonight, the sense is it was bad. The language was dreadful, but they hope, because he said sorry quite quickly, that they can move on from this. And yet, Labour are determined to push ahead with this. They're not going to ignore it, partly because so many people have been offended by these remarks, even if the debate is worth happening, but also because it fits perfectly into the mantra that they want to get into voters' heads in the run-up to the election, that the Conservatives don't just let down vulnerable people, that they actually sort of look down on them as well. And whether or not you like the way that these remarks were discovered, secretly recorded and then secretly released to the Labour Party, this is the kind of skullduggery we're going to see more of on both sides as we hurtle towards the election. There's a suggestion tonight in Westminster there could be more to come on Lord Freud. We're not sure if that's the case or not, but maybe, just in case, the government has actually pulled him out of a session in the House of Lords tomorrow, so he's sort of been conveniently bundled out of the way just in case something else happens. This is embarrassing tonight. This is certainly a row, yes. Is it a disaster? Not yet.
Laura, thank you very much indeed. We're here to discuss this are Penny Pepper, a writer, a disability activist, and Sam Bowman of the centre-right think tank, the Adam Smith Institute. Penny Pepper, first of all, when you heard about Lord Freud's views, what did you think?
I was immediately offended and very alarmed. To me, it echoes. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the context and that he was thinking aloud. That, to me, doesn't sound like much of an excuse that he was thinking aloud. But it highlights, for me, the way the government address issues for disabled people. There's a huge muddle around employment issues. I'm also really startled. I mean, anyone who's got any kind of social conscience about this, how can you say one set of human beings within our society should be paid less than another?
Sam Bowman, I mean, there is a problem, isn't there, because 50% of people who are registered disabled aren't working. But what did you make of his remarks that if people want to work for £2 an hour, then that should be looked at?
Well, there's a huge problem. It's not just people with physical disabilities, people with learning difficulties. Yes. Only 12% are in work. And many, many people who are not able to work because of their disability would like to. And what Lord Freud was saying, and what hasn't been picked up on today, but he did say, and it's in the transcript, is that if they're able to work, if they're able to find a job that pays less than the minimum wage, the state should top up their wages. And I think that's right.
But that is different from saying if people want to work for £2 an hour. That's different from being topped up. If people want to work for £2 an hour, they should be way too... I mean, that presumably you would never agree to someone working for £2 an hour.
Well, no, but Lord Freud said exactly this in his comments.
Well, I just think that, you know, this is all... I just think it's an outrage. It's this idea that some people are worth more than others in the workplace.
But presumably that you would accept that there are certain jobs that some people do that other people can't do, and that will go for people who don't have disability as well as people who do have disability.
Absolutely. But as I've said before in other contexts, it's about capability, appropriateness. I wouldn't go for a job as a prima ballerina at the Royal Ballet because I wouldn't feel the job spec. And there are a lot of complex and misunderstood issues around employment for disabled people. And I also feel that what the government are doing is they're cutting services that would truly support us.
It would be fair to say that if David Cameron came back very, very quickly and said that the minimum wage is the minimum wage for all. What do you think of a more regulated, broader idea of an employer subsidy which doesn't exist at the moment? There are small pockets, but doesn't exist if people want to employ people of all sorts of abilities and disabilities.
I think that's exactly what we should do. And I think that there are lots of countries in the European Union and the United States that have lower minimum wage rates for people with disabilities.
No, I don't mean lower minimum wage rates.
And also top up their income. So the key is to allow people to work for what the market can get them and then top up their wages afterwards.
But that is a very difficult thing to say, the market, and it's also about what people's worth is. The people's worth may not just be judged in how many rivets they can tack in an hour. Surely there has to be a broader idea in society of what people's worth is.
That's another aspect that's offended many in the disability community, and particularly activists, because it's this idea that your value is about your productiveness within a very narrow understanding of what productiveness is. And I don't think the government will be able to live that down very easily.
What do you say to that?
I think that a lot of people would like to be in work, and it has a huge impact on people's quality of life. If you are disabled, if you have learning difficulties and you can't find a job because of the minimum wage, because the value of your labour, you're not talking about the value of a person in any way.
Why not, though, I'm asking?
Because if you think of it that way, then...
The value of someone to a company for a particular reason of the ecology of that company.
Because markets don't think that way. Markets are about allocating resources. They're not about good or bad. What we should be doing as a society is correcting those after the event. We should be transferring money to people who need that extra top-up so they can have a decent standard of life.
Isn't that perfectly reasonable in a way that would encourage employers to employ people with disabilities, and then perhaps when that happens, then there is a sea change?
I think there'd be a likelihood of abuse within that system of employing people because they know there's a top-up. There are schemes in place now that do this to some extent, but it's partly there needs to be a much broader discussion about what employment is, what your economic worth is. I'm employed by the government's own assessment processes. I'm counted as severely disabled. But technically I shouldn't be in work. I mean, it just highlights how crazy it is. And this statement, whether it was intended to go public or not, has just offended many people.
Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Today saw an intensification of fighting in a war